I want to hear cannons. Downfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Throws up with the head. Intercepted. At the 40. Derek Brooks 30. Brooks to the 25. 20. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And then the cannons come. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Hello and welcome back, Bucs fans, to a brand new edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast live on YouTube today. The 2024 NFL Draft is in the books, and quite frankly, the Bucs made out like bandits. We're going to break it down today, introduce you to the newest members of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers roster, and put a grade on it. Ultimately, get your thoughts, my thoughts, Evan's thoughts, and yeah, Evan, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. Obviously, draft is now in the rear view mirror, and it's crazy because it's all this build up, for essentially 72 hours, and then it's done just like that. So, yeah, we're gonna go, pick by pick. We're not gonna grade each individual pick. We are gonna talk about each pick, but we're not gonna grade each individual one. We'll do a letter grade, sort of right at the end there. So, yeah, really, really excited to get going here.
Yeah, excited to get into this with you guys. And excited to be here. It's been one whirlwind of a weekend. Let's just dive right into it. First round, with pick number 26, the Bucs select Duke offensive lineman Graham Barton. Now, there has been a lot of debate, Evan, about whether Graham Barton's going to come in here and play center, if he is the new answer at center for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, or if he could potentially plug in at a guard spot. Some people say that Robert Hainsey is not going to be in the mix at guard. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about where he will ultimately end up. He's a guy that, just like a lot of other linemen in Tampa Bay, he's got versatility. He's got experience playing all over the offensive line, and that's going to bode well here in the system with Tampa Bay. But you look at the depth chart, when you look at what he brings to the table, I mean, he is one of the higher graded centers in recent history. One of the higher graded offensive linemen. I Bleav Pro Football Focus, he had an 88.7 overall grade across the last two seasons in college, which stands as the fifth best among all FBS tackles in that time span. What are your thoughts on Graham Barton and what he brings to the table? Because I was begging for them to go trenches here in the first round, and I think they delivered. This guy's a stud.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, just like you mentioned, can play all five spots, really. Played left tackle last 2 years at Duke. Spent his freshman season as a center. So the last time he played center was his freshman season, but his arms are a little bit shorter, which for an NFL tackle probably isn't the best fit. So that's why a lot of people figured he'd probably have to kick inside, whether it be at guard or center. And yes, the Buccaneers did have a need at both left guard and center, so either one really would have made sense. But the Buccaneers, I think Jason Licht made this pretty obvious in his post-draft press conference right after they picked him, where the Buccaneers view him as a center. They acknowledge that he can play guard. They acknowledge that he may at times go to guard, perhaps, but they said that they clearly view him as a center, and clearly it's a guy who they think could be their center for the next 10 years. So that's why they drafted him at pick 26. I mean, it's a lot of times you'll see a lot of tackles off the board in the first round, and you did see a lot of tackles off the board in this first round. But centers or guards, a lot of times those are day two guys, right? So it's really, if you think a guy is going to be really, really good for you, though, you make an exception. So, and I think Graham Barton, could be that exception. I did not expect him to be there. It sounded like about a month before the draft or so, started to get rumblings that his stock has been rising, and just figured I Bleav I had him in my mock draft. I think I had him 17th to Jacksonville. So, I do think that, with that being said, Graham Barton being with the Buccaneers, it definitely helps their interior, right? It helps the interior of the offensive line, and it just ensures that, that they can start to clean that up, because that was a weakness of the offensive line last year for sure.
Yeah, I think what I'm excited to see ultimately is the package that you get with Graham Barton, and that's a week 1 starter. That's a guy who can show up and play wherever they ultimately decide to play him. Now, I'm going to guess he's going to play center. I would like him to play center. I feel like that's the answer. I feel like that's the right situation for him, and I feel like that's the most likely scenario. You and I seem to agree. So I think he is your Bucs starting center week 1, and I'm excited to see those early reps. You know what I mean? There's always going to be welcome to the NFL moments for a lot of these guys coming in. Tristan Wirfs Tristan Wirfs, the only one that really comes to mind is like Khalil Mack during
Khalil Mack, that's pretty much it.
2020 season in Chicago, but that's the outlier. Like, that's the best case scenario. Even Tristan Wirfs, who has been one of the better offensive linemen in the league, had one of those moments. And I think with Graham Barton, seeing how he can respond to that and ultimately how consistent he can keep his game week in and week out is going to be exciting. But man, I was banging my chest on the pre-draft show that we did, and I was a JPJ truther, but really. I wasn't going to be upset with anybody on the board. I'm glad they went trenches. I'm especially glad that they went offensive line. And best case scenario, Barton's a guy here for a very long time.
Yeah, and the thing was, their hand was kind of forced in a way when they were on the clock at 26. Latu was gone, Dallas Turner was gone, Jared Verse was gone, and even Chop Robinson was gone. So none of those guys were even options. I'm not sure about Chop. I think they still would have picked Graham Barton over Chop, but had one of those other 3 edges been there, Latu, Verse, Turner, I do wonder if their game plan would have changed. But hey, it worked out for him well. Barton falls, like I said, I didn't really expect him to. And like you said, hopefully, in a perfect world, he's their problem solved at center, and it's a problem ever since Ryan Jensen went down in August of 2022. Like it's been an issue ever since. Robert Hainsey did fine in his first season as a center, in 2022. But then in 2023, he really took a step back, and I think the Bucs knew that they had to upgrade that, and they definitely did that. So.
Yeah, and shout out to Bucs assistant GM John Spytek. He was talking to the media after day 2 of the draft, and he says this, quote, I know the whole world is caught up in fantasy football right now, and receivers this and running backs that. I think offensive linemen are sexy as hell, and I agree. I think a lot of what the Bucs have been able to do with the success that they have had on the offensive side of the ball these last couple of seasons, whether it was with Tom Brady or it was with Baker Mayfield, it always starts with the offensive line. How much did we talk about the offensive line last season? Just talking about how consistent those guys could be with a different type of quarterback. I'm excited to get some extra reinforcements in there. And again, I cannot overstate how excited I am about Barton in Tampa.
Yeah, no, and the fit was obvious, right? And then Jason Light goes on to say, he's got it reminds me, playing a lot of Ali Marpet. He's got a little bit of Ryan Jensen, but he's got the personality of Tristan Wirfs. That is, pretty much. He's not. I don't think he's trying to say he's going to be exactly like all those players, but it's sort of a pretty ringing endorsement there, for Graham Barton. So it makes a lot of sense, and it was a pretty good fit.
Round number 2, pick 57. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers select Alabama edge rusher Chris Braswell. They stay with the trenches here, which, again, I admire. I do. But some of the things that you've heard about Braswell, I guess similar to what we said about Chop Robinson before the draft, is he seems like a guy that, the Bucs are going to have to take some time to develop. Curious to see what his role can be in year 1, what side of the line he's going to be, how many snaps he gets. What are your overall thoughts on Braswell? Because there's definitely a lot to like here, and I think he's a guy that under Todd Bowles, he could be a very good fit.
Yeah, I think he's similar to Chop in a way of, being sort of a project. He's a little bit more, he uses more of like the power, type rush rather than Chop uses speed. So I would say he's more of, I think he's a little bit more explosive with his first step than a guy Diaby is. I think Diaby is definitely more on the power side of things. Braswell is a little bit more explosiveness to him. But again, this isn't going to be a guy who's going to come in day 1 and be, fantastic player for the Buccaneers. I do think it's going to take some time. And I do think it could be very similar to what Yaya Diaby's rookie season was, where not a starter at first, and then mid-season, maybe some injuries happen because, not everybody's going to stay healthy, and, you step into a role and maybe you don't give up that role, right? So maybe, Braswell becomes a starter later in the year. I don't expect him to be a starter week 1 for this team, but regardless, even if he's not a starter, I still expect him to be on the field, in a rotational role in the meantime. But yeah, I mean, they knew they needed edge. I think everybody knew they needed an edge. A lot of the edges, all the edges were gone. All the first round caliber edges were gone by 26. So you weren't drafting the one there. I do wonder if they would have drafted Marshawn Nealand, the edge, who went to the Dallas Cowboys, 1 pick before the Buccaneers selected Chris Braswell. So I do wonder if Marshawn Nealand was going to be their pick, and the Cowboys sort of took their guy there. But I think they are pleased with Chris Braswell. Nick Saban's a big fan of his, of course. I mean, I don't think he's going to come on, and bash the friggin' dude, but he was a big fan of him. Braswell obviously starting opposite Dallas Turner. Turner got a lot of the attention there, and I do think Braswell can be productive. There was a few other players on the board that I thought might have been a bit of a better pick there, just because my personal assessment of Braswell. But I mean, again, it addresses a need, and I don't think it was a huge reach either. So overall, pretty decent pick.
Yeah, Jared Cox in the chat says, hot take here, I think he'll start by mid-season. When you look at the edge rushers for Tampa Bay, I mean, you really are looking at a room that is still filled with, for the most part, rotational talent. Randy Gregory is going to be rotational talent. I think JTS, by this point in his career, I can't imagine he's going to be taking many snaps away from a guy like Yaya Diaby, or even at this case, a second-round pick. So when you look at this edge rushing room, and you look at Braswell's fit with the team, you did bring up the similarities to Yaya Diaby, but I am very curious to see ultimately by the end of the season how many snaps he has played. How much of an impact can this guy really make? And are we going to see some legitimate upside? Now, I will say this. I think people expecting, we talked about the similarities to Yaya Diaby. I think people expecting that kind of production may be a little disappointed as he tries to kind of find his footing through the first, 6, 7, 8 games in the NFL.
Yeah, I wouldn't come in and expect him to lead the team in sacks as a rookie like Yaya Diaby did, right? Part of that was due to the Bucs' poor pass rush. I know that the numbers are a bit skewed, because their team sacks are actually not bad, right? Their team sack number was actually not bad, but their team leader in sacks was a rookie who had 7.5. So it's a lot of guys getting, 1 or 2 sacks, but there's not that dude that got a bunch, right? I'm not saying you have to have that, but the team leader only having 7.5. You'd like that number to be up a little bit more. So yeah, I'm not expecting Chris Braswell to come in here and lead the team in sacks this coming season. I don't think that's realistic to put on him. Yaya Diaby had a good rookie season, and it wasn't really realistic to put on Yaya Diaby right ahead of his rookie season. So I don't think anybody was expecting or predicting Yaya Diaby to lead the team in sacks. So Braswell can come in, and play a rotational role, and then maybe become that starter by midseason and just show flashes, right? He's not a finished product. The one thing I will say about the pass rush room, now that, yes, they can add somebody, I guess. They can add a veteran or whatever. But now that we have full offseason, right? We have free agency, we have the draft, and we've seen what they've been able to do with the pass rush. I am still kind of a little worried about that group. I mean, you cut Shaq Barrett, you sign Randy Gregory, and then you draft Chris Braswell. So Randy Gregory and Chris Braswell are pretty much your only additions. I don't know. I don't not say count on it, but regression might be in order for Yaya Diaby. I don't know if 7.5 sacks is going to happen again. I am a little bit concerned still about the pass rush. Randy Gregory is not somebody. He's a bigger name, but if you look at what he's done the past few years, it's and are you really going to be relying on a rookie in a second round that much? I don't know.
Yeah, and honestly, I think this is a conversation that another day we're going to spend way more time on. I think between now and the beginning of the season, the pass rush for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is something that we will have probably talked about the most, because when you talk about this defensive line, you talk about 4 or 5 man fronts. We can talk about the interior as well. The prospect of the development of guys like Kalijah Cansey and Yaya Diaby. I think there was a Bucs defensive coach that just said this week how excited they are to see both of those guys line up on the same side of the line. So if you get Chris Braswell, who potentially could break out and have, some flashes this year, if you can find some consistency in your rotational guys, that would be a nice start. But you almost can't talk about the pass rush without bringing up the linebackers as well. And it's interesting to note that the Buccaneers did not seemingly draft a replacement for Devin White at linebacker this year. So that says a lot about their faith in KJ Britt. Now, getting after the linebacker between Levante David, KJ Britt, and some other guys obviously in the mix, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think KJ Britt was a huge winner, this past weekend. I mean, the fact that the Bucs, and they had their opportunities. There was a lot of inside linebackers that fell. Peyton Wilson fell a good bit. Cedric Gray from North Carolina fell a good bit. There was a lot of guys, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. went in the 5th or 6th round. But there was a lot of inside linebackers available at multiple spots for the Buccaneers to take. And I think it does show their faith, that they have in KJ Britt, and even a guy like Servassier Dennis, I think. So, I think KJ Britt was probably one of the bigger winners here. Jared in the chat says we have enough at edge. Watts, Ramirez, Braswell, Gregory, Nelson, Yaya, JTS. Just because you name a bunch of names, that doesn't mean they're all good. Marquise Watts, probably a decent developmental guy. Do I want to rely on him? No. Jose Ramirez was on the practice squad last year. Chris Braswell was going to be a rookie. Randy Gregory has been a journeyman pass rusher the past few years, and as Al Bundy mentioned, is also 31 going on 32. Anthony Nelson has been nothing more than a rotational guy who has flashes every now and then, but didn't do much last year. Yaya Diaby, a bright spot. And Joe Tryon-Shoyinka has been a massive disappointment. So just because you have a lot of numbers there, I don't know how much production you exactly see there.
Yeah, I think, similar to some things about the Buccaneers in 2023, when you look at that group of edge rushers, you're relying on those guys. You're relying on the upside of pretty much every single one of them. You're going to need Randy Gregory to have a productive season at 31 going on 32. You're going to need Marquise Watts to continue to develop. And I will say he's a name that I forget, but he is kind of underrated. I am excited to see if he can continue to develop, if he continues to get more snaps this season, where he can ultimately fall into line, because he's been productive before, whether it's in preseason or not. He's had a couple of highlights as well. Braswell, you're banking on the upside. Diaby, you're banking on the upside. Nelson, the Bucs already paid him, and I think last year was a disappointment considering he was one of the higher tenor defensive linemen on the team. If I'm not mistaken, I think he's getting paid more than Shaq Barrett was on his current contract. Shaq left and got paid more in Miami.
I'm not 100% sure. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it is close. And then I think I don't know if I'd say the X factor, but the thing that could change a lot, and we will move on to the next pick. We spent a lot of time on Braswell and stuff, but Braswell leads into something else, right? So, the thing that would really change, I think, a lot of people's opinions on the pass rush, and be like, wow, this pass rush is really good, is if Joe Tryon-Shoyinka somehow miraculously in year 4 can become the player that the Bucs thought they were drafting at 32 in 2021, right? That's basically it, right? So can he become not the 4.5 sack guy? Can he become the, guy that even gets you 8 sacks? I think that could really change things. So far, he showed no signs of that. So I don't think you can count on that. I just, to me, in year 4, you are what you are at that point. And to me, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka is a rotational guy who's going to be able to get you 3 or 4 sacks a year, but is not going to be a guy you're going to be able to rely upon for snap after snap. So, like I said, we don't want to spend the entire episode on the edge rushers. We know that it's a popular topic, and just like you mentioned earlier, it's going to be a topic we talk about more than once, right? This is not going to be the last time that we are talking about the edge rushers. I'm sure throughout the entire football season, we will be talking about the pass rush because quite frankly, in today's NFL, it's very, very important.
Yeah, we could do a whole show on just the pass rush tomorrow, but let's move on to round number 3. The Bucs keep it on the defensive side of the ball. Georgia defensive back Tyke Smith. Now, this is another guy who I think a lot of people are excited about. One, just because he comes from Georgia. But two, he has that potential to really find himself in one of the better fits in the NFL in a Todd Bowles defense. Bucs safety coach Nick Rapone said today that rookie Tyke Smith will cross-train at nickel and strong safety, and Christian Izien will train at nickel and free safety. Kayvon Merriweather will work out at both safety spots. What do you think of Tyke Smith?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. The draft sort of did I guess a lot of Bucs fans, kind of not really a disservice, I guess, but really kind of fooled them a little bit because it's misleading. So he's listed as a safety, and he's gonna be the nickel corner. He just is. Like I said, just because he's listed as a safety, he is going to be their nickel corner. That's what he played at Georgia. That's just what he's going to do, okay? This past season, according to Pro Football Focus, Tyke Smith had 434 snaps in the slot. He had 105 snaps total in the box/deep safety role. So that is a guy who was a nickel corner at Georgia, and I'm expecting to be a nickel corner in the NFL as well. So would I expect him to be a week one starter? I'm not sure. I think there's a decent chance. I do think there's going to be a battle in training camp between him, Christian Izien, maybe even a guy like Tavier Thomas for the nickel spot. I would think Bryce Hall probably projects as more of an outside guy, but so I do think there's going to be some competition, but I think long term, in an ideal world, you're probably looking at Tyke Smith being the Bucs nickel corner, which is good news for a guy like Zion McCollum, who is another huge winner. After this weekend, to me, he projects to be an outside corner, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, they didn't get any cornerbacks. They didn't get any cornerbacks." They kind of did. It's just, Tyke Smith is listed as a safety, and he is going to be their nickel corner, most likely, though. So, the fit makes a lot of sense. I was a bit surprised that they prioritized nickel corner as early as they did, but, if you like a player enough, you don't want to lose them. So,
yeah, I definitely think he's going to be a good fit, and I think he complements, a guy like Jordan Whitehead pretty well, because when they play both of those guys down low, whether it's run support, they just bring an aggressiveness to the game. And I think it's one of those things where you're a product of your atmosphere. And regardless of the pieces that the Buccaneers lost, I know Carlton Davis headed to Detroit, I still feel like they're going to be in decent shape. Now, let me ask you a question, just because we are talking about the secondary, and we won't take as long as we did on the pass rush here. But when you do look at the cornerback room, it's really shaping up for Zion McCollum to be your cornerback too. Do you Bleav he is ready? Because the Bucs clearly do have the faith.
Yeah, I was just about to say, well, it doesn't matter if I do, the Bucs do, right? So yeah, I mean, it's he took a big leap, I think, from year one to year two. I think he was one of the most improved players they had. But at the same time, it's clear that the Bucs are hoping he takes yet another leap, right? Because I think if he's your outside corner for 17, NFL games, and you get what you got last year, I don't know how that's going to go. I think the Bucs are expecting Zion McCollum to take another step forward. We'll see. That's a risk they have to take. Obviously, trading away Carlton Davis, it saved them cap space, which they needed the cap space. It got them another day 2 pick, which they needed, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. What they ended up doing with that pick, because it was just 3 picks after this one. And then, it's just a pretty good situation for McCollum, right? It's a pretty good opportunity. Because like I said, they didn't really draft anybody that I would say is like going to be an outside corner, and they had their opportunities to. They definitely did. Obviously passed on a guy like Kool-Aid McKinstry at 26th overall, passed on TJ Tampa from Iowa State a bunch of times, and a lot of people were wondering why he fell. So yeah, they definitely they definitely did go back and take a look at McCollum and like what they saw. So a lot of people were saying, "Oh, they need another corner. They need another corner." And my response to them was always like, "You may think so, and that's fine. Like you can think it's your opinion, but the Bucs don't think they do." So they have a lot of faith in Zion McCollum. I think we knew that, but before the draft. But I think the results of the draft just kind of confirmed that.
Yeah, I'm curious to see I'm curious to see how consistent he can be. That's the big thing. You know, I did like his development last year. I think I said a couple of weeks ago that like I didn't see the same hype that everyone else did, and I think that's just the lack of consistency. Like, it still felt like there were a couple of weeks last year where he got picked on, but I could
mean,
be
no,
wrong.
you
Again,
just look back to the last playoff game. I mean,
yeah.
the Detroit really picked on. I think Jamel Dean exited the game, and after that, yeah, Detroit really
That's
picked on him. So
That's the thing, too. We'll save this conversation for another podcast. I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but the consistency and the durability of Jamel Dean
yeah,
is obviously going to be a talking point as well. But let's go ahead and move on further in the draft. Just 3 picks later at number 92. I like this pick a lot. The Buccaneers take Washington wide receiver Jalen McMillan, a guy that really has the potential to find his role in the wide receiver room this year, but I not going to sit here and say it's a direct replacement for Chris Godwin, but I think when you look at, the real estate, when you look at the pick, and when you look at the guy's skill set, I think the writing may possibly be on the wall for Chris Godwin here, but I think there's a lot to like with McMillan as well.
yeah. You don't have to say it, but I will. To me, he is the Godwin, Chris Godwin replacement. I believe, and I know this isn't everything, but I believe McMillan is 6'1", 192. Chris Godwin is 6'1", 208. So they have very similar builds. Now, the one thing McMillan will have to do in order to be the Chris Godwin replacement, and folks, we are not talking about tomorrow, okay? Chris Godwin is not getting traded. If he was going to be traded, it probably would have been this past weekend for a draft pick, right? He's not going to be traded, right? So he's going to be in Tampa Bay for 2024. It's beyond that, right? He's a free agent at the end of this year. The Bucs just paid Mike Evans. The one thing that McMillan is going to have to do if he wants to be the true Godwin replacement is he's going to have to play a bit outside a bit more. He was a really good receiver. Washington's offense, a loaded offense, right? Michael Penix Jr. throwing the ball, but you had Roma Dunze there, you had Jalen Polk there. A lot of attention is going to go to those two. But McMillan played mostly in the slot. Okay, and that's fine. Like, the slot receiver nowadays is basically a starter, right, in today's NFL, especially in Liam Cohen's offense. A slot receiver is going to be a starter, but he didn't play a lot outside. And I think in the NFL, to be able to be like a Chris Godwin replacement, you're going to have to play outside a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, sorry, really quick. We know in the Bruce Arians offense, Chris Godwin was in the slot, right? He was a slot receiver, but before that, he was outside. So, and he's had success both ways. So I do think that, in order for McMillan to be the true replacement for Godwin in 2025, okay, not 2024, in 2025, I do think he's probably going to have to play a bit more on the outside, learn that, how to manage that in the NFL. But his potential is really good. His speed's pretty decent. And yeah, he's a really good route runner, pretty good hands as well. So there's a lot to like here.
Yeah, I think he does have experience playing outside. Chat says he played outside in 2021, but 14 touchdowns his last 2 seasons in college. So as many weapons that were on the offensive side of the ball for Washington, he was staying productive. He was finding a role, and you talked about his efficiency as a route runner. A lot of people praising his ability as a route runner. I think one of the biggest things he'll need to prove early and often is that he can make those physical catches that are going to be coming, whether he's playing outside or not. If he's playing out of the slot for whatever reason, he might have to make some physical catches. So proving that he can stay consistent and be a sure-handed target is going to be a big-time, I guess a big-time deal for him in the rookie season, considering the implication of where the Bucs are going to find themselves just a year from now. So I'm not going to say that, his development has more pressure on it than the next guy, but when you think about next man up and where the Bucs could find themselves financially next season, he could be the difference between looking for a free agent wide receiver to bring in and potentially be your number 2, or just looking at what you have in the room, depending on the year these guys have.
Right. And look, it's, and then I saw in the chat, they mentioned that Liam Cohen had said that Chris Godwin will be playing in the slot a little bit more, this coming season. Plans can change. That's all I'll say. Plans can definitely change. So, I don't really think. Yeah, Jalen McMillan I'm not saying he has no experience, right, on outside. It's a little different playing in college versus the NFL, though. It's going to be different, and that was almost 3 years ago. So his past snaps, His total pass snaps from 11 games played this past season, he had 259 passing snaps. 231 of them were in the slot. So he was a slot receiver for Washington this past year. So, but had a really good year in 2022. Like I said, 2023, they had Rome, they had Jalen Polk. So there was a lot of guys there. And, I do think, though, the Bucs like his potential. And again, he's very similar mold to Chris Godwin as far as, the physical traits go. So again, it's not like I'm guaranteeing Chris Godwin's going to leave or whatever, but I do think using a top 100 pick on a wide receiver with Godwin in the last year of his contract, after you paid Mike Evans, to me, it kind of shows that, like, yeah, I don't know I don't know how confident they are in being able to retain Chris Godwin after the season.
No, I agree, but you said it, not me. Let's move on here. Pick number 125. The Bucs' last pick for a while.
For a long time.
They stay with the offense here. Another skill position pickup. Oregon running back Bucky Irving. Seems like, just like a lot of the other guys in this draft class, there's a lot to like. One of the tougher running backs, I think, when you look at the landscape of who is available here. What do you like about him from Oregon?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is he's tough to bring down. I mean, for such a small guy, he breaks a lot of tackles. I know Trevor Sikkema of Pro Football Focus is a massive fan of Bucky Irving. He can catch the ball in the backfield too. Not the best athlete. Didn't test great at the combine. Not going to beat you in a foot race really per se. But he's going to be able to. A lot of people are like, oh, the Bucs short yardage situation, right? I know they need a short yardage back. A short yardage back doesn't have to be just big, right? I mean, Bucky Irvin's ability to break tackles, and I understand he's going to be playing up against much stronger, much more physical, much better talent in the NFL. I get that. But his ability to break tackles, that matters in the short yard situations, right? So being able to, if it's 3rd and 1, you do an edge play, he's able to get to that edge, and all he has to do is make that one guy miss, and he has the first down. There's the difference there, right? So, which we've seen the Bucs running backs, whether it's Leonard Fournette or Rashad White, they sometimes get tackled there, and then they end up getting stuff. So there was a few, to be fair, and to be completely honest, there was a few running backs higher on my board at the time, and they were available. Than when the Bucs picked Bucky Irving. So I may have not necessarily picked him, but I understand the thought process. Small dude, like I said, I Bleav he's only 5'9". That doesn't really matter to me, especially with a running back like that. That Darren Sproles was 5'6". Like that doesn't, like, I'm 5'5" and Darren Sproles is 5'6".
How about Doug Martin? How big was he? 5'10"?
I think Doug was 5'9", actually. Yeah. I think Doug was 5'9". So yeah, I mean, very similar mold there. And Doug Martin didn't have the elite foot speed either. I remember there was more than once where he got chased down a couple of times, right?
Oh God,
almost had a touchdown.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you how many touchdowns.
Yeah, so I mean, there was a few times there. So I do think that Bucky Irving could be maybe like a Doug Martin type, for the Bucs. And look, they needed a guy for Rashad White too. Yeah. I like Chase Edmonds. It was smart to re-sign him as depth. Because he didn't really have much. Sean Tucker I think that experiment's pretty much over. He'll probably be on the roster just to have another guy on the roster. But, I think they needed to keep Rashad White fresh. They used Rashad White a lot last year, and I think they need to keep him fresh for December football, down the stretch football, keep those legs as fresh as possible. I think Bucky Irving will help that. So,
yeah, Chase Edmonds in the mix as well. But I think Bucky ultimately finds himself in a good position because of the faith the Bucs have in Rashad White. He's not expected to come in and eat up 50% of the snaps. I think the role that he's going to find himself in is kind of like what it was at the end of that 2022 season. You had mentioned Leonard Fournette. I know that he wasn't the same Leonard Fournette that we got during the playoff run from years prior, but he was like an end of the game back. Like I mean, they would kind of bring him into the game sometimes at very confusing times. And I hope under a new offensive coordinator, we don't have to deal with that anymore. But I think what they are looking for is kind of like that 1-2 punch dynamic. But Rashad White, I would expect Rashad White to still be not a bell cow, but just your go-to guy for most of the game.
Guy. Yeah.
For 3 quarters.
Yes. Yep. I mean, and look, it's, It's a physical game, right? Rachaad White's been pretty fortunate, not getting hurt at all, right? So, if in case he does, I mean, look, Chase Edmonds got hurt very early last year, and Rachaad White had to carry the bulk of the load there. If Rachaad White gets hurt, Bucky Irvin can step in. So I know the pick was a little bit confusing at the time for a lot of people, but I think it makes sense.
95 picks go by for the Bucs before they pick again. Pick number 220. They take offensive lineman from UTEP, Elijah Klein. Klein had a 93.5 PFF pass blocking grade in 2023. He had just 3 total pressures on 372 pass blocking snaps. A camp body, a fresh face to bring in here, and potentially had some valuable depth to this offensive line.
Yeah, obviously, when they picked him, to be completely fair, I didn't hear much about him, right? I haven't really done much research on offensive linemen or anything like that. So when they picked him, I didn't really recognize the name. But there are people smarter than I who study offensive line, who, I Bleav Brandon Thorne, who is an offensive line guru, like scout guru, that's this and that. He had a 5th round grade on him, and the Bucs picked him in the 6th. So not that bad, and they actually they had the 220 was the last pick of the 6th round. So the very end of the 6th round there. So yeah, I mean, it's fine. He can come in, maybe compete for a left guard spot. At the same time, we do have to remind ourselves this is a 6th round pick. I wouldn't be expecting him to win the job out of camp, because he's a 6th round pick for a reason. But dude's a Jason Light offensive lineman, right? He's a mauler, bowling ball, and just one tough dude. I think he called himself at his press conference gritty. So I think he's definitely a worth the swing, I guess, in the 6th round there, potentially, get some, if not a starter, get some decent depth there.
Yeah, speaking of gritty, the Bucs wrap things up at pick number 246 with tight end from Washington, Devin Culp. And, you look at Devin Culp, limited as a receiver, clearly, but kind of like O'Keefe, just another big-bodied physical run blocker for the Buccaneers to use along that offensive line. What do you make of Devin Culp here?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really view him that way. I view him as a guy who is actually quite the receiver. He's built like a big wide receiver. I think only had a couple of catches and like 200 yards. But again, we were playing for Washington.
Yeah.
We just mentioned everybody that Washington had. There's only one football, right? So there's only one ball to go around. So I think Culp can actually be a little bit of a change of pace from what they have, with a guy like O'Keefe, to be fully transparent. And I know we have a whole training camp and everything, but I don't know if O'Keefe makes the roster. I don't know. And also, there's no guarantee Devin Culp makes the roster either. I mean, at the end of the day, he's a 7th round tight end, so it's fine to add some depth to that room. We're not going to spend too much time on it. We'll see if he flashes at all during camp. But yeah, I mean, it's clear. Kate Otton's another winner from this weekend, right? Because it's clear the Bucs, they had their opportunities to pick a tight end as well. They had their opportunities and they didn't. So it's clear that the Buccaneers, guys like KJ Britt and Kate Otten and Zion McCollum, they have a lot of faith in those guys. And a guy like Logan Hall, because they had opportunities to pick an interior defensive lineman and they didn't do it. So I think it's clear that, the Buccaneers do have a lot of faith and hope and confidence in a lot of those guys for this upcoming season.
Well, then I do apologize to Devin Culp. I was not familiar with your game. Let's put a grade on it, Evan, to wrap this show up. When you look at how the Bucs address their needs in the 2024 NFL Draft, personally, I can't really complain. I wasn't nearly as plugged into the draft as a lot of other people were. I didn't do 30 mock drafts. But I do think the value they got, the positions that they addressed, they are basically just, I guess, doing what we expected them to do. We talked a lot leading up to the draft about some holes that they needed to fill, and in offensive line, that center spot was one of them. I think they got a week 1 starter in Graham Barton. You didn't potentially get a week 1 starter in Braswell here in the 2nd round at edge, but you addressed a need. You need another edge rusher. You need a guy that you can potentially develop on the cheap. And if, he plays into those strengths that he has and he develops, and that's going to be awesome. I think if Braswell has an anomaly rookie season, just like Yaya Diaby and Kancey continue to develop and Vita Vea continues to stay consistent and be one of the better interior guys, you could be in some trouble. But you're banking on that upside. So I do like what he brings to the table. I like bringing in another safety because I guess you don't really know what this safety room is going to look like in 2-3 years after Antoine Winfield gets his contract. So you've got a guy like Tyke Smith that you can definitely keep around, and he can find value as a starter later in his career. I know it's a deep safety room right now. I like Jalen McMillan. You addressed a direct need with potentially having to replace Chris Godwin. We talked about that scary possibility, but after 8 years of playing next to Mike Evans, it just might not be in the cards for them to continue paying him over $20 million a year. If his production drops off and they can come to terms on a team-friendly deal, that seems like the best-case scenario for keeping him around. But I don't know if that's the best-case scenario for productive football, because if he drops off,
the offense isn't going to be as good.
Right, so it's a direct need. Running back Bucky Irving, Rachaad White's not going to be here forever. I know we are still kind of looking up at the development that he can bring to the table, but he's not going to be here forever. 2 more years in a Tampa Bay Buccaneer uniform, potentially. So if Bucky can develop, you're banking on that development, just like any other draft class, then you find yourself in a better situation financially instead of struggling to potentially pay a Rachaad White, depending on what his situation looks like. Offensive lineman, tight end, some extra offensive trenches help to round out the draft. I'm going to give it a B+. I talked about banking on the development of these guys and some of them, really not having an open window to start unless it's either an emergency or, a couple years from now, the room that they are in has changed. So I will give it a B+. I got to give Jason Light his credit where it's due. By the end of the season, this could easily be an A-. I could eat these words. But as of right now, I think with what I am expecting from all of these guys within the first 10 weeks of the season, I will give it a B+. I don't mind this draft one bit.
Yeah, and actually, really quick, one note: Culp he ran the fastest 40 of any tight end in the draft. So he ran a 4.47 40. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go over every pick. You did a great job there. Really overviewing that. I hate to say it's that great, but I had B+ as well. And again, just like you said, and look, revisionist history, you can do it anytime you want, but it could end up being, in the A's, right? Because I think a lot of these guys, especially their first 4 picks, are going to be playing roles for them this season. I mean, Graham Barton's probably going to be a starting center, right? Chris Braswell, maybe not be a starter right away, but I think he's going to play a role. Tyke Smith, maybe they're starting nickel corner. Jalen McMillan, good chance he's their third wide receiver, which in Liam Cohen's offense is a starter. So I think their first 4 guys are going to play roles. You're going to see them a lot. Even a guy like Bucky Irving, I still think you're going to see a decent bit. So, I am curious to see how those guys go. And I think, give them a B+. I give them a B+ because there's a few times there was a couple of players I would have picked over the guys that they did. But at the same time, I also give them a B+ because I think the positions that they hit on were the ones that they needed to hit on. So even in the later rounds, double dipping along the interior offensive line, then adding a depth tight end there, even if those guys don't make the roster or don't pan out, I still think it's smart to take swings at those positions. So that's why I went with a B+.
Awesome. Taking a look at the chat here, Noah 2023 says an A-. I like this draft. Al Bundy, our good friend, says a B. I'm going to give it a B+. You and I agree. We'll both give it a B+. That seems to be the general consensus. I think most of the grades that I've seen between Trevor Sikkema, between Greg Allman, between some of the NFL Network guys, it's anywhere from like a B to an A-. I haven't really seen anything lower than a B, and I haven't seen anything higher than an A-. Jared Cox will give it an A-. So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have covered all of our bases. That'll just about do it for this episode of the Cannon Fire Podcast. I want to say thank you to everybody hanging out with us over in the chat room on YouTube. Jared Cox, Al Bundy, Noah 2023, anybody else that I may have missed. Brian Duncan gives it an A. Thank you, Brian, for hanging out. MK Mikey Kelly says Bucky was my favorite pick. 110% of the reason is because of the name. Bucky the Bucket running back is not a bad branding scheme, especially when we're getting a lot of Buckies closer to this part of town. I don't know if you're familiar with the magic that is a Bucky's gas station.
I know of them. We do not have them up here, but I know of them, yes.
It almost sounds like an insult to call them a gas station at this point. I'm not even going to lie to you. Al Bundy, one more here, the cherry on top. He gives an F for the Falcons. This was probably one of the most shocking moves of night 1 of the draft. The Atlanta Falcons, we'll cover it really quickly, After paying Kirk Cousins a guaranteed deal of well over $100 million, they take quarterback Michael Penix Jr. from Washington, a Tampa native, at pick number 8. What did you think of that?
Well, you said of one of the most whatever shocking questionable moves on night one. I would argue it's one, since I've been covering the draft and watching the draft, it's one of the most shocking and questionable draft picks I've ever seen. I don't understand. And the thing that sucks is I like Penix as a prospect. That's what sucks about this.
I do too.
And the people are grading an F and this and that, and it has nothing to do with Penix. Like, it really doesn't. It's just the situation. Like even if they sign Kirk Cousins, and I understand, okay, technically, Kirk Cousins' deal could be a 2-year deal, it's like the way like the guarantees and stuff work. Look, man, like, you had an opportunity to add somebody. I understand that, okay, Bucs fans are going to think the Bucs are going to win the NFC South. The Falcons upgrade a quarterback, though, right? Kirk Cousins is better than Desmond Ridder. And the Falcons were neck and neck for the most part for a lot of the NFC South, for a lot of last season, right? The NFC South. They have a legit chance to win the South this year. You had a chance to pick an impact player in the top 10.
I mean,
and
so
instead,
many options.
You pick a guy who is not going to contribute at all this year. Like literally at all. Not even like, Chris Braswell will be in a rotational role. No, Michael Penix Jr. is going to be riding the bench. Like he's not going to be playing. And then also he's 24 years old. So by the time Kirk Cousins' contract is up, he's going to be at the youngest? He's going to be 26, 27, maybe even 28 before he ever starts a game for you. So yeah, it's a poor use of resources. People are trying to defend it. I don't understand why you're trying to defend it. It's a dumb pick. It's a dumb pick on a good player, but it's a dumb pick. So I feel for him. I feel bad for him because I think he had about 10 better situations he could have gone to, and instead he lands in this one.
I agree. But I think we can both also agree here that it is hilarious that it is happening to the Atlanta Falcons. That's the show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you once again for hanging out with us. We will talk to you soon with some more post-draft NFL coverage. We'll maybe break down the draft class here again with some special guests, get some outside input in the operation, and we'll talk to you soon. I'm your host, Rhett Matthews, signing off from my or actually, hold on. Let's do the whole spiel. Social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show. And, of course, Buccaneer news as it happens. You can follow my co-host, Evan Wanish, on Instagram at Bucs_daily. You can also find him on Twitter at EvanNFL and check out his written work at BucsNation.com. Last but not least, you can find myself on Instagram and Twitter at Redicus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back. All right, let's get out of here. Evan, thank you so much. We will talk to you guys soon. Until then, and as always, thank you for listening, and go Bucs.